All right, shall we kick off then? All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Skelton Thatcher webinar on successful communication patterns for effective responsibilities in DevOps. In a minute, I'll introduce you to the panel, but first of all, a few words on the agenda. We'll see who's joining us today, and then we'll have a quick conversation. Well, the bulk of the conversation, actually, the interesting part about effective communication patterns for DevOps, of course, and maybe a little bit of Agile too. And then we'll allow time for live Q&A. If you do have questions as we go along, please put them in the Google Hangouts chat room, and we'll queue them up and address them as we can towards the end. There's one more thing to know about before I introduce you to the panel, which is that we have a hashtag for today, which is #DevOpsComms with 2 M's at the end. So if you'd like to make any comments on Twitter, please feel free to do so. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two experts. Matthew Skelton from Skelton Thatcher, and Sabine, I'm going to attempt to pronounce your name, Bernecker-Bendixen. Was that close?
Nearly close.
nearly close. Well, that's very generous of you. Okay, so why don't we get on with our content then? Sabine, perhaps you'd like to go first and introduce yourself and explain, your involvement and interest in DevOps.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Sabine Bernecker-Bendixen. I'm from the northern part of Germany, and I'm working with adults and pattern in facts of communication since more than 20 years, and I'm working as a consultant with partners from different industries for more than 13 years. For 2 years now, I am in the IT tech industry, and yeah, DevOps is really interesting for me because it's a lot about the people. It's not only a managing system, but it's also a philosophy where the human inside is very important.
All right, I see. Those are some things we definitely want to pick up on later, but perhaps, Matthew, you'd like to introduce yourself next?
Of course. Hi, my name is Matthew Skelton. I'm co-founder and principal consultant at Skelton Thatcher Consulting based in the UK. We help organizations to change their technology and teams to suit modern practices and approaches like DevOps and continuous delivery and cloud and so on. My background is in software development. I've been building software systems commercially since 1998, but increasingly recently been involved in DevOps, and it's been interesting actually in a similar way to what Sabine has said. The interaction between technology and teams is quite fascinating for me.
Excellent, thank you. So you both mentioned DevOps there. I think a pretty good place to start would be to attempt to define DevOps, really just because there's so much conversation about it, so many different ways to think about it, but let's try and get an agreed definition for the people on the call, especially as I expect there'll be varying degrees of knowledge here today. So Sabine, perhaps you'd like to go first, and then we'll let Matthew build on that.
Yeah, okay. As I told, I'm dealing with the tech industry for about 2 years, and when I started with it, I had to do a lot of studies about what really means DevOps. And what puzzled me was that I found a lot about tools, how to work with DevOps, but just only even short hints about the thing that DevOps is a lot about communication and the people inside. And that's what I experience when I'm at conferences, that there are always two different parts. One part says DevOps is about tools, the other part says DevOps is about culture, behavior, communication. And I think it's both. Both is together DevOps, but the basic for doing DevOps, for bringing people from different silos together, from different departments together, needs a lot about training on behavior, on communication, on how we deal with each other when things go worse.
Excellent. So I guess today we're very much towards that behavioral and people side and away from the tooling. Matthew, did you have anything you wanted to add to that or to build onto it? So I think we might have lost Matthew for a moment there. Sabine, are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Well, why don't you tell us about, you were recently speaking around these topics, I think, at DevOps Days, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so which DevOps Days was that, and when was it?
Oh, I have spoken at Ljubljana in spring in Paris. I have been in Tel Aviv and Amsterdam, and it was very interesting.
Excellent. Matthew, are you back with us now by any chance?
I'm here now, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so what I'd like to do is we'll flip back to our definition of DevOps. Sabine, if you wouldn't mind holding that thought, and then we'll talk to you more about your adventures at DevOps Days. So Matthew, we were just talking about DevOps for...
So when we're thinking about what we mean by DevOps, I think it's sometimes useful to
Hello?
Right, Matthew, can you still hear us okay?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Right, so we lost you for a moment there again. Would you mind rewinding, please?
Yeah, of course. I think when we're thinking about what DevOps is, it can be useful to exclude some things from that definition. Certainly what we've seen is that some people think that DevOps is just infrastructure automation, or just build and release engineering, or just web operations. And all of these things are useful and often form part of what we'd see in an organization doing DevOps, but in themselves they're not what we mean by DevOps.
Right, I see. And of course there is some irony there that the tooling side of DevOps appears to be what's tripping us up today with our technical problems. However, so I think we've got a good understanding now of DevOps and a term that we can use going through the webinar. So staying with you, Matthew, why have you chosen to focus on communications today?
Well, we've noticed, so when we've been working with organizations that have begun to adopt some of these new tools and practices, we've noticed that although some of these new tools can help, and sometimes new tools can be essential, by themselves the new tools can just sometimes add complexity or obscure what really needs to happen, what the changes that really need to happen in the organization. In fact, often it's the communication between teams which is the most broken or dysfunctional thing in the organization, and so that's the thing which if we fix, if we address it, then we can have show that the biggest positive change for that organization.
Right, I see.
And in particular, it's the relationship between the people who build stuff, so what we might call the development side, and the people who run it or operate it on the ops side. And it's the interaction between those two groups of people, which is what we focus on when we talk about DevOps. Right,
and of course that would run through all of the interactions. So perhaps no matter how good the tooling is, the communications and behaviours will determine success in everything. Sabine, I can see you nodding there, so I hope there's some agreement.
Yes.
Perhaps you'd like to introduce the notion of patterns for communication then, and help us to understand that before we move on to some specifics. And my understanding, going back to our earlier conversation, was that was the theme of your keynote at DevOps Days?
Yeah, was debugging communication. And the basic for this is that communication is always followed by misunderstandings, and misunderstandings are very hard to clear up afterwards, and they take a lot of time in clearing up all those misunderstandings between people. And when we talk about DevOps and when we talk about ship faster, building faster, and so on, there is no time left for clearing up all those misunderstandings. So the best way would be to avoid communication or reduce the case of not to avoid communication, to avoid misunderstandings and to reduce misunderstandings. That would be much more useful than going on with all the way we are communicating and don't care about misunderstandings.
Right.
So
can you perhaps illustrate that with an example of one of the patterns, or I mean, go ahead and tell us some more specifics about these patterns. It sounds intriguing.
Yeah, I've chosen a smaller company because what makes me really weird is that when you talk about DevOps, you always hear about the unicorns, the big companies with a lot of people, with a lot of employees, and with a lot of money behind. And I don't know if these examples of the company running DevOps is a good example or a good motivation for smaller companies. So I choose a company which has 15 people inside. I just want to give a short description because this company appears in all my patterns I try to describe. And yeah, they have 3 owners. And one of the owners, the CTO, came one time to me, and he had the impression that all his team was working, everyone on his own, not working as a team together, although they had to work like DevOps. They had to deal with each other because they were a global player, producing software for industrial production, and they had to work very close together between development and operation. But there was no team idea. And he has had a hard time in private where he was brain blocked such ideas of communication and so on. And so we came to the point that it is his task to bring this team together, to make them work together and to communicate. So we started a workshop where we talk about ideas for the future, what they should do to bring the company back into life and not to work the way they have always worked, and to involve all the employees into these ideas so that these ideas become ideas of the whole team and not only his ideas he gave into the team. And this worked pretty well to develop ideas as a team via communication. You will force transparency with such communication patterns when you talk about ideas and not only say, this is what I want, but if you involve the team and made them part of your goals.
Right, I see. And so, Matthew, did you want to build on that or bring in your own examples at this point, or shall we let Sabine continue?
Let's hear a bit more from Sabine, I think, first.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Tell us more.
Tell us more, yes. The second part, which was really hard, was that the teammates preferred to send emails or messages instead of talking directly with each other. Although they were sitting nearby, they just preferred to write short emails, and with writing emails, a lot of things could happen. Communication is a complex topic, and it's not only the words we are using, it's also our voice and our body language which has impact on the meaning of the communication. And the words, there's a study of Alfred Marabian, perhaps you know him. The impact of the words in communication is only 7% in unclear situations. When I talk to someone I know very well, then it's different, but in the business way, and when we have a problem or something like that, and it's not clear what I really mean, the meaning of words is only 7%. And when I start to write emails, I do it in a quick way. Writing an email, send it back, and it's not my stuff anymore. So I don't think a lot about what I'm writing, and the other side gets this email, reads this email, and starts worrying about it. And that's bad. It would be much easier to stand up from the own chair, walk into the next conversation with my team colleague, and we can talk and clear up everything in just a few minutes. When we are sending emails, there is a lot of worrying about that, not talking about it in an open way, and a lot of misunderstandings appear, and we have to search a long time where these misunderstandings come from. So it's much easier to talk directly instead of writing emails or messages. It's the same way when we talk about the customers. Then we should better take off the phone and have a short call instead of always writing emails. Emails are good for making things clear, appointments we have made or something like that, but not to clear up problems or something like that.
Right. So almost the more scope there is for misunderstanding, and perhaps the more urgent the issue, the more you should reach out and try to talk to people face to face, or at least
Yes.
over a video conference or on the phone. I see.
Yeah, for perhaps Matthew and I, we haven't met before in person, and we organized this whole webinar via video conference. I think it wouldn't work if we have done it only writing emails or something like that, because you need to see the other one. You need to get an impression of the other one, and that wouldn't work via email. So it's the whole, the complex of the people you are dealing with, you need to experience, and that would only work in direct communication. And when teams like DevOps should work together, people from different professions, from different departments,
Right,
use on topics, and so they need to talk together.
Right. So that's great. You mentioned earlier the alarming statistic of around 7% of the information going through. Perhaps we'll be able to tweet that out later so that people can look at it, and you know, any other works you have around this, I hope we'll be able to share those on Twitter or in some other way with the people in the Hangout.
Yeah.
Do you have names for the patterns? Do you have concise names for the patterns? You've described quite a lot of interesting things going on there. I mean, are there friendly names?
I think the first one is fostering transparency.
Okay.
So that you talk in an open way about ideas, and so build up much stronger transparency, which is very motivating for other people. Mm-hmm. And the other way is talking instead of writing.
Talk, don't write. That's an easy one to remember. Thank you. So Matthew, I wonder if we could flip over to you, and perhaps you could give us some insight into how you might identify what patterns are being used in an organization. You know, my understanding is you have good experience of going into a range of organizations and understanding what's going on and then helping them to evolve and improve. So perhaps you could tell us how you get a feel for what patterns are being used.
That's an interesting question. When we go into organizations to help them with things like DevOps, one of the things that we do for the first day or two when we're there is really to listen and observe and see how the teams interact. Yeah. And then we start to get a feel for how things happen normally, if you like. Then we'll go and start asking some more detailed questions. But we're still very much in an observational mode then, without trying to make too many assumptions. And it can be surprising what comes out of those questions and observations. So, for example, we went into one organization, and after a few days, we discovered that the delivery teams, so what you might call the dev teams, had a strong incentive to deploy 20 features every month. I think it was something like this: 20 features every month, or 20 features every sprint or so. And but then in the ops team had a very strong incentive to close tickets that have been opened relating to deployments or to incidents. They had a strong incentive to close these tickets within a particular time frame. So you really had two very different sets of priorities pushing against each other. And it was not at all surprising that the kind of communication between the dev side and the ops side was very antagonistic, because their drivers were very, very different. What was interesting within this organization, so there were about 300, 400 people in the organization, I think about 150 in the technology teams, but they'd realized that they needed to address some of the problems. I mean, partly that's why they invited us in, but they'd already started to do some work. And they had decided to help with the communication by having two small teams taken one from the operations side and one from the development side, and bring these two smaller teams together in the middle to try and pull development and operations together, to act as a kind of bridge between them, and to start improving the communication there. So that was really interesting to see that they'd explicitly thought about the need for that to evolve over time as well, for them to change the nature of the communication that they were expecting between these two little teams in the middle, bringing the other two teams together. I've got a slide, a kind of diagram which might help to visualize this. Let me see if I can share the diagram.
While you try and share that, if I just talk to the people who are in the Hangout at the moment, we have around eight minutes left. So if you'd like to post any questions, now would be a great time to do that while Matthew finds the slide, and then we'll hopefully have time to answer them at the end.
So I think you should be able to see.
Yes, we can see Type 5 Temporary DevOps Team.
Okay, so it looks a bit like that. And so what they've done, it wasn't exactly like this, because they actually had two teams in the middle. But the effect was like this. The teams in the middle were pulling together the development and the ops teams, finding ways of communication, finding new tools and techniques, finding new practices, so daily stand-ups or regular points where they would talk to each other and collaborate on certain things. They used that to evolve how the nature of the communication there, to open up communication channels. So I think that can be a really powerful way of proving, and it's definitely had success for them. We've seen they've made huge advances in what they're doing, and that's definitely been down to the expectation that these smaller teams in the middle would help to pull the other teams together and to establish lines of communication.
Right, I see. I'm just going to check to see if we have any questions coming in. None. Okay. So regarding the diagram that you just showed, I guess people might be interested in why you've chosen to call it a temporary DevOps team. Would you mind just briefly explaining that for people who aren't familiar with the diagram?
Yes, the danger, of course, if this team in the middle were to be a permanent team, there's a danger that it acts as an intermediary between development and operations, and so kind of because this team's in the middle, there's a danger that it stops development operations from getting closer together. There's another sort of version of this which is on the screen now. Which can work quite well in a permanent basis, where a DevOps team can sit in between development operations and facilitate the communication on an ongoing basis. That seems to work well, and that's probably really what this organization is really doing. It's seeing these teams in the middle as facilitators, facilitating team to help maintain the channels of communication. So I think in that case, having a permanent team like that is fine, as long as it doesn't get in the way. As long as it kind continues to remember that its role is to facilitate.
Right, I see. So the final comment there about as long as it remembers is interesting, because I have a question here, which is, what is the worst communication anti-pattern that you've seen? So Sabine, perhaps you'd like to start off?
Oh, yes. The worst thing is that people do not communicate in a proper way. They just say, okay, the other should know what I mean. And I think that's the worst case, when people stop communicating with each other in an open way. No matter which management system we are following.
Right, I see.
I'd like to offer an additional view, which is that I think in some cases too much communication can be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So that sounds a bit strange, but there isn't really time to go today into the subject of Conway's law, but it's something that's worth looking at if any of the listeners have not heard of this before. We'll tweet a link to Conway's law after the session. But essentially, Conway's law says that the shape of the systems that we build reflects the communication patterns between different parts of the organization. And if we know we want to build, for example, microservices or a services-based architecture, then having all the teams communicate very to a large degree, communicate on everything and try and collaborate on everything, the resulting software will not look like microservices or services oriented. It will look more monolithic because of the nature of the communication. So sometimes, depending on the kind of software that we want to build, we might deliberately want to restrict the communication between teams, which might sound a bit artificial, but evidence suggests that it produces the right kind of software at the end.
I see. And I guess that's a kind of another level of communication pattern where you're looking at organizational comms rather than one-to-one, setting things up and creating an environment that will encourage individuals to talk in the ways that we've just described. So we have just a few minutes left. I don't know if there's anything either of you would like to add to build on what you've already said. Any key points that perhaps you feel you'd like to share with the audience? If not, I would be... I've just got a pop-up. I was going to ask my own pet question there about communications and tools, but sadly we'll be robbed of that because a question has popped up. Let me just find that one for you. Okay, so the question I've been asked is, how do you choose the DevOps communication pattern? How do you go about selecting? We've already talked about two, the fostering of transparency and that kind of talk, don't text or email model. So I'm sure there are many more. How do you go about actually selecting the pattern to use?
Can you repeat, please, because I didn't get it. Bad connection.
Sure, sorry about that. So we're interested in how you actually, the process of selecting a communication pattern. What things would you factor into your decision when you're selecting a way to communicate?
Matthew said before that you have to, when you come as a consultant into a company, you have to listen and look very well what's going on. And I think that's the most important thing, that you get an impression of what fits to this company, to this person. And that's the most important thing, that you have to look and listen very well and then choose what would be a good way. And what is a good way depends also on the single individuals in the team. And the whole form of organization. So I think it's the most important thing.
Right, I see. And Matthew, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, certainly very important. As Sabine said, to listen first, even to ask people who within the team, literally go and ask them, what do you feel you need? What do you feel is blocking you? What would make your life not necessarily easier, but what would make the life of the team easier, more effective? But try to look for things which perhaps the people in the organization have forgotten about or can't see because they're kind of too involved in what's going on. So coming in from the outside and having that outsider's view to be able to spot things which look unusual to me.
Right. I see.
There's an interesting question here that's come in.
So would this be any other techniques? Short
yes.
Yeah. So we are going to overrun a little bit. I hope that you both have time to do so.
I can do that. Yep.
We'll handle this question and then we'll say cheerio, I suspect. So just another 3 or 4 minutes. So the question is, are there any other techniques, short of forming intermediary teams, for encouraging devs to share operational responsibilities? There's a suggestion that the top-down mandate is the only successful technique that Dave Cliff has seen. Thanks for submitting the question there, Dave. Matthew, would you like to open on this one?
This is a really good question. Yeah, thanks for submitting this. It's very pertinent. One of the reasons that we've seen behind developers not really wanting to take on operational responsibilities is that actually many developers simply don't understand what operations is about. What happens to software in a production environment, in live, whether it's on premise or whether it's in the cloud. People they just don't know, and often I think the developers don't really feel very empowered or educated to be able to do anything about it. So they might feel, oh, you're going to be on call for when it goes wrong, when the software breaks. But they've not been trained in incident response. They've not been trained in how to read logging messages or how to use a useful log aggregation tool. They've not been trained on how to read the metrics dashboards properly. So I think there's a big gap in awareness that people who have some more awareness of how these systems operate can work with developers who historically have been more familiar with, the application domain, that kind of thing, or the business domain and application code, and can work with developers to. When I say developers, I mean people on the product team, so developers, testers, product managers, scrum masters, these kind of people, to raise awareness of the kind of things that can happen in the production environment, in the live environment, and not just raise awareness, but also train and increase the skills of people in the product team to be able to use some of the tools that are available and have been available for a long time to people on the operations side. There's plenty of tools now which we should be using across operations and development, things like metrics and monitoring tooling, log aggregation tooling, alerting, this kind of thing. So that people from both development and operations actually have real day-to-day practice in using these tools, and so feel more able to do something useful if there's a problem when they're on call.
Yeah, so I think in summary it's about trying to build the infamous full stack appreciation we talk about, an appreciation for the roles of the opposite party, be it ops or be it dev. Sabine, did you want to add anything to that question?
No, I totally agree with what Matthew said. So.
Right, excellent. Okay, well, unless you have any burning issues, I think we'll wrap up at that point. Is that okay with you both?
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks again to everyone who joined us. Keep an eye on the Skelton Thatcher website and on Twitter, and we'll try and post some references and maybe even have a few conversations on those mediums. So thanks again to Sabine and Matthew, and we'll close off here. Bye now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.